Then came the line that cut deeper than shrapnel. "Something tells me Uncle Sam ran out of men." The laughter was awkward, brittle. I stood there frozen until the smell of burning wood reached me. My certificate glowed orange inside the fireplace, curling in on itself. My mother tried to save it, but all she pulled out was a scorched frame. I left before anyone noticed, stepping into snow that looked almost holy under the porch lights. 3 years later, a letter from the bank arrived. A single sentence changed everything. Change of ownership, joint title, Irene Torres and Martin Hayes. I called my mother. Her voice was tired, apologetic. "Everything's fine," she said. But it wasn't. I understood then, when a man needs a title to feel like a man, home stops being a shelter and becomes a battlefield. The next morning, the air smelled of diesel and salt. I walked down to the docks, hoping the sea might rinse something clean. An old man was hunched over a fishing reel, a faded cap stitched with U.S. Air Force, retired. Without looking up, he said, "You served at Seymour, didn't you?" I nodded. "Weapons engineering, Valerie Torres, Arthur Reed." He replied with a slow smile. "Used to work there myself. You've still got that stance, the kind that says you haven't learned how to stand down." We talked for hours about engines, storms, and the strange ache of returning home. Before leaving, he said, "Cameras don't lie, but people do. If you ever can't speak, let the truth speak for you." His words followed me back to the house. That evening, I set up small cameras along the porch and kitchen, telling myself it was for safety. Deep down, I knew it was for proof. Near midnight, a notification blinked on my phone. The footage showed Martin looming over my mother, papers spread across the table. "Sign it, Irene. This is my house now." My mother's hand shook. She whispered my name before he cut her off. "She doesn't live here anymore." My stomach turned cold. I called Arthur, told him what I'd seen. The next day, he found Martin's old employment records, violence at a shipyard, an investigation quietly buried by friends in City Hall. "He won't stop," Arthur said. "Men like that never do. They just wait for permission." I saved the video, labeled the file proof, and taped a note above my desk. "Silence is how monsters breathe." The morning sky had the color of dull steel. I was hunched over an old drill in the garage when Martin called me to the table, his voice flat as a file. He sat there with his shirt open and a half-finished beer, eyes calculating like someone measuring a bargain. He asked for $50,000 to fix a rundown motel, framed it as a family rescue. If I helped, he said, he would finally treat me like his own. I answered steady and short. If he wanted respect, don't start with money before breakfast. He smiled the smile that didn't reach his eyes and told me he made the rules in that house. I told him I designed weapons. I knew how to take pressure. My mother squeezed my hand under the table, like she had some small we could both hold. Later that afternoon, a bank alert popped up on my phone. $30,000 had gone out of our joint account. I went home to find my mother curled in a chair, red-eyed and apologetic. "He had threatened her," she said. I watched the camera footage and saw him slam the contract down. Voice low and cruel. "Sign it. Irene, or I'll show your daughter what real hell looks like." I saved the clip and sent it to Arthur. His reply was 2 words. "Keep quiet. Let him think you're weak." I understood then that he was setting a trap larger than intimidation. He was rearranging the furniture of fear. That night, I listened at my mother's door to the soft ruin of her crying while the TV drowned the sound. I gripped the banister and swore, aloud to no one, that the thing he thought he controlled would one day be what broke him. I cooked because confrontation dressed in food felt less like an ambush. The potatoes steamed, butter melting like a small promise. We sat with the game flickering, each fork untouched. Martin lifted his beer and told us to pray before eating. I said I prayed some people would learn respect. A spoon clattered. My mother's hands trembled. When he stood to leave, he came back with a sheaf of documents, loan papers, and a transfer of title. He said he was saving my mother from ruin. I tore the top page from his hands and photographed it. His reflection warped in the glass, ugly and sudden. I texted Arthur a single line. "If I disappear, you know why." He answered, "Recording is live." Unknown to me, the cameras were still piping footage to a server he could reach. Dinner ended in silence. I scrubbed plates while the storm pressed at the windows. At the bottom of the stairs, I told Martin he could practice being a man, but he still had to learn how to be one. He said something about power being blood, down the road. Arthur watched the feed on his laptop, saw the kitchen lights strobe, and leaned closer, whispering something to the empty room. "Don't be alone tonight." Rain hammered the roof in heavy sheets, thick as smoke. My bag was packed by the door. My mother sat in the living room, clutching her Bible, whispering prayers too soft to hear. I told her I'd found a small place near the docks. She begged me not to go, said Martin had been drinking all day. I kissed her forehead and said fear was the only thing keeping him alive. The TV went silent. Footsteps dragged across the kitchen floor. He stood in the doorway, holding the titanium bar I'd once brought home from the base. Smooth, silver, shining in the dim light. He asked if I was as tough as the metal. I told him to step back. He laughed, the kind of laugh that carried venom. "Think you're still in uniform?" he said. "This is my house." I told him it was my mother's. His smile vanished. He stepped closer, eyes glassy and dark. The first swing missed. The second didn't. Pain exploded behind my temple. Blood spread warm against the tile, mixing with the rain dripping through the ceiling. My mother screamed. He shoved her away. Before the world went black, I saw the red camera light blinking, steady, alive, recording. Across town, Arthur's laptop flashed an alert. Motion emergency detected. Transmission live. He called 911, shouting the address, then drove into the storm. When he reached the house, Martin was raising the bar again. Arthur's voice cracked like thunder. "Drop it!" "Hayes!" He grabbed the weapon. It hit the floor with a sound that cut through the rain. The sirens arrived. The camera never stopped blinking, cold and certain. I woke under white hospital lights, the smell of antiseptic sharp in the air. My mother sat near the bed, eyes hollow. Arthur leaned by the door, soaked and steady. "You saved yourself," he said. "I just made sure the right people saw it." Hours later, detectives came with a military investigator. "Hayes says you attacked first." They told me. I smiled through the pain. The camera remembers better than he does. The investigator nodded. Because of my federal clearance, the case now belonged to the Pentagon. That night, headlines twisted the story. Martin's lawyers called me unstable. By dawn, a Pentagon statement cut through the noise. Active investigation. Assault against a U.S. Air Force officer. The whole country suddenly knew my name. I stared at the titanium bar sealed in evidence beside me, its silver glint steady under the light. I once forged steel to protect. Now it would protect me, just in another way. A week after the hospital, I was summoned back to Seymour Johnson Air Force Base. The hall smelled of metal and coffee, and the walls seemed to hum with something larger than justice, something official, cold, and certain. When I walked into the briefing room, the American flag hung behind a long table. A screen glowed at the center, and Arthur Reed stood quietly in the corner, wearing his dark blue jacket, face tired but bright with resolve. The officer at the head of the table asked me to summarize the incident. My throat was raw, yet my voice didn't shake. "He didn't just hit my head," I said. "He hit the country I served." The words hung in the air like static. Then they played the footage. Rain hammering the windows. The sound of steel colliding. Martin's voice spitting out, "You're not family." No one moved. When the lights came back on, the steel table gleamed, cold and clean. The Pentagon representative cleared his throat and announced the decision. The case would be transferred to the federal court in Raleigh. At the trial, cameras filled the room. Martin entered in a gray suit, trying to look composed. My mother sat near the front, rosary wound tight around her hand. His attorney claimed self-defense, said I was a veteran with trauma. I stood and met his eyes. I was a soldier once. I said, but I never struck an unarmed man. Arthur handed the prosecutor the drive. The video played without commentary. Only rain, the strike, my mother's cry, Arthur's command. When it ended, the judge looked directly at Martin and spoke quietly. You didn't just attack a woman. My mother rose, trembling, voice breaking as she confessed how he had forced her silence. The courtroom went still. The verdict followed like thunder. 20 years in federal prison, no parole. As they led him away, he glanced back, searching for reaction. I gave him none. I turned to my mother instead, whispering that we were finally free. Outside, a line of veterans stood waiting and saluted me as I passed. That was when I cried, not from victory, but because for the first time, silence had finally been heard. The garden outside the rehabilitation center shimmered with early morning dew. My mother sat by the window, watching women in light sweaters water the flower beds, each of them carrying their own kind of quiet sorrow. I pulled up a chair beside her. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The air smelled faintly of lavender and rain. She finally broke the silence, her voice thin but steady. I used to think keeping quiet meant keeping peace, but silence only fed the fear, didn't it? I nodded, tracing the wrinkles on her hand with my thumb. You were brave, I said. You just didn't know it yet. I slipped something small into her palm, a single key, cool and heavy. Her fingers curled around it, then opened slowly. The word Haven was engraved on its surface. That's our new home, I told her. Arthur gave me his old house by the docks. He said it's seen enough battles. Now it's time for someone to live there. Her eyes shimmered, unsure whether to believe in peace after so long. I told her my plan, to turn that house into a center for veterans and women like her, people who had learned to survive in silence for too long. I'd call it the Iron Haven Foundation, a place not built from walls, but from what we endured. Arthur arrived that afternoon with a small box in his hands. He placed it gently on the table between us and opened it. I asked why. He looked at me for a moment, his eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. Because what hurts you can still protect others, if you forge it right. We sat there for a while, the three of us, in a silence that for once didn't feel dangerous. My mother ran her fingers across the metal's cool surface, and for the first time since the trial, I saw her shoulders relax. Weeks later, when Iron Haven opened, the air was filled with the scent of salt and fresh paint. The American flag hung over the entrance, its fabric catching the morning sun. People gathered, veterans, survivors, neighbors who had watched too much and said too little. My mother stood near the gate, a light blue scarf around her neck. Arthur stayed in the background, arms crossed, a quiet pride in his eyes. Midway through the ceremony, a letter was handed to me on official stationery from the Department of Defense. It was short, formal, signed by a general I once knew only by title. The department extends its gratitude to Valerie Torres for her service to veterans and her contribution to civilian justice. As I read the words aloud, a hush fell over the crowd. I wasn't the woman on the floor anymore. I wasn't the soldier caught between duty and fear. I had become something forged from both, living proof that strength, when tempered by compassion, could turn even pain into protection. 3 months later, Iron Haven opened beneath a wide Carolina sky. Justice isn't polite. Sometimes it kicks the damn door down. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of waves. Then came the applause, steady, rising, like the tide. Arthur stood near the back, his posture still military, his hand lifting in a slow, deliberate salute. I returned it, and a smile found its way to my face, the first one that didn't feel borrowed in years. By nightfall, the celebration was over. I stayed behind on the porch, the sea spread out before me like a living thing. The sound of water brushing against the steel railing carried through the dark. Once, that sound made my chest tighten. Now it beat in rhythm with my pulse. I opened my journal and began to write. The iron bar that once drew my blood now guards this place. Maybe justice isn't something we chase. It's something we forge from what tried to destroy us. A red light blinked softly against the wall. The camera was still on, quietly recording. It no longer felt like an eye watching for danger, but a witness standing guard. My mother stepped out, draping a shawl over her shoulders. She placed a hand on mine, warm and steady. "Hear that?" she asked. I nodded. "The sound of steel and sea," I said. "The two things that once terrified us now sound like peace." We sat together, listening as the wind carried salt and dusk through the air. The camera tilted toward the horizon, its lens catching the last glow of daylight spilling across the waves. Crimson, calm, endless. The world seemed to exhale with us,